Howdy and hello, I'm OhDough. Hope you're doing good. Let me explain why Helldivers 2 went from players hell diving to the game Helldying. It's very simple. They made it so every new update gave players less of a reason to log in. You can see that from the Steam charts if you just look at those for 2 whole seconds. And this is mostly because they got insanely lucky making a game that popped off beyond anyone's wildest dreams. And they spent the past few months trying to undermine that achievement, maybe intentionally, to reach the current point where players just don't get enthusiastic for new updates, and they haven't for a while. To explain what that means, let's go ahead and look up some patch notes. Patch 0.100 happened on March 6th. Major updates, planetary hazards active, meteors and whatnot that I wasn't particularly a fan of, but we'll pass by that. Balancing, eradicate missions now require more kills and enemies spawn more often. I think they also changed the map so you don't really have the high ground you had before, which didn't make much sense to me. I didn't mind the increase in enemies, but taking away high ground just seems kind of strange. Hidden changes. Increased headshot damage. I proved that in a previous video. Increased headshot consistency. I can't prove that, but it feels that way. And also increased intensity of the AI. Before this update, I wasn't getting swarmed by bugs in a way where they would pin me down. And when this happened, this update, I said exactly that. But now it happens all the time. It's become more of an issue as well as things have gone on. Now we have some buffs here and there. Flamethrower, increased damage per second by 50%. Massive. The laser cannon, increased damage against durable enemy parts. Also massive, and some other buffs too. But this is where things take a turn for the worst and would be a repeating problem going forward. They nerfed a weapon based on a bug, and also probably the fact it could merc charges really fast. Railgun, decreased armor pin in safe mode, and decreased damage against durable enemy parts. This nerf would effectively make Railgun, which was only useful against the bugs mostly during this time, effectively garbage. It would still be decent versus Hulks, that didn't really change, but you were always never the greatest versus tanks and other structures, but there was a bug letting Railgun two-shot, if not one-shot, Bile Titans. That was the only thing that I thought was insanely broken. Railgun being able to take out chargers fast was nice, but if you couldn't kill the Titans, you would still need players to bring things for the Titans. Railgun was just a one-stop shop for both. Moving forward, the Breaker. Ammo reduced by 3, increased recoil by 25. Reasoning? You should use your stratagems more, folks. We'll get back to that later on. But Breaker nerf never made sense to me. It didn't change a whole lot. All it really served was to annoy people. Reloading more often means you're not playing the game as often. You're spending less time shooting your guns, and it doesn't feel good. It's a nerf that didn't accomplish much, aside from just making folks not enjoy a weapon as much as they were before, which is a constant trend as well. Stratagems. Shield Gen Pack, increased delay before recharging. I read somewhere they made it to where it's now a minute for a recharge if it's not broken. And before, if you got hit with your shield, hide behind cover, it recharges in 10 seconds. Now, it has to be broken to recharge in 10 seconds, is what I heard. Could be wrong on that. My apologies. And they buffed the 120mm barrage and 380. So that's good. The last part's awesome. There's some good stuff here, some bad stuff. I would say the gutting of Railgun's unfortunate, but at least Flamethrower is a lot better, and Laser Cannon's good too. So overall, this patch, outside of the hidden changes, would be a W, but the hidden changes will come back to bite us in the future as well. And they also made it so they fixed armor rating values by not reducing damage as intended. This was a fix that everyone thought would make us a bit tankier. At least I did. And this is what I believe led us to taking more headshot damage. Then we have patch 0.102 on March 12th. Enemies. Reduce the spawn rate of chargers and Bile Titans because we didn't have good ways of dealing with them. At the time, there was no Quasar Cannon, and folks didn't really want to use the recoilless rifle. People weren't that good at the game at this time, and they weren't confident using no backpack, in this case, no shield gen, which is why it got nerfed in the first place, because folks were crutching it. They kind of still do a little bit. In addition, we've reduced the risk of spawn spikes of chargers and Bile Titans. So just reducing the elites and heavies that spawn in the missions. And notice how they don't mention bots. People were one-tricking the bugs, and they still kind of do, which is fine. Lowering the health of charger's head, making it so you can now one-shot them with recoilless, with eats, eventually the Patriot Exosuit, and the Quasar when those two things get released. Huge change. More viability, more meaningful weak points, more counterplay the player can use when facing enemies. Massive. That's huge. Gameplay. Electronic countermeasures modifier, which had a chance of giving you a random stratagem instead of the one you input, has been removed in order to be reworked. Which at the time, I thought it worked like this. I thought it would make it so your codes were scrambled and you could maybe learn a code, input that, and get exactly what you want, but it's a different code than normal. Instead, you could put the same code in 1,000 times or maybe 5 times and get a modifier or a stratagem you don't want. So they removed that. Understood. And they also made it so the exosuit, which released, I believe, on March 8th, I could be wrong though, no longer destroys itself when firing a missile while turning. Exosuit retains its melee functionality even when damaged. The big change here was not blowing yourself up. Turns out they should have kept that in because now the rockets are absurdly weird to aim. Before, rocket, minigun both hit the exact same thing. One reticle, and for folks saying add 2 reticles, you are smoked beyond belief. Do not do that. You want 2 things moving around. Pause. You want 2 things moving around your screen? That's a terrible idea. Just make it to where it goes back to what it was. I was okay with it blowing you up, but now they're inaccurate unless you do some shenanigans, which is not even worth mentioning. Then we have patch 0.200 on April 2nd. Have the negative effect of operation modifiers that increase stratagem cooldowns or call-in times. This took a while to happen, and honestly, it's not good enough. It's a good thing, progress forward for sure. Still not good enough because they nerfed the breaker and said, we want y'all to use more stratagems, essentially. Meanwhile, we still have things in the game to this date that reduce stratagems by 1, and you can't get rid of it while playing the mission. There's no object to destroy and get rid of it. You can't pick 4 stratagems, and you just can't use your 4th one when playing the mission. Destroy an object, boom, you now have all 4 back again. You're just minus 1 stratagem. They also make your other modifiers miss when playing against the bugs, and it just reduces the overall fun and encourages meta, which is something they were against in the beginning, so it's mind-blowing. Moving forward. Primary, secondary support weapons. Arc Thrower fixed charging inconsistencies. You could do some rapid fire, and shoot it really fast. It wasn't crazy fast. It was faster. Maybe a half second, maybe quarter second on the high end. But it was fun. It was a rhythm game in a sense. It will now always take 1 second to charge a shot. It made the Arc Thrower so boring to use just with that change alone. On top of this, they also nerfed the range by 15 meters and increased stagger force. So 2 nerfs, 1 buff. That buff would later get nullified in the way it mattered. But I think players are just becoming more aware of where the baseline is. Wilbur's. People were using the Arc Thrower to slap Battle Titans across the map with infinite ammo, mind you.
I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but the Emancipator exosuit might be slapping Wilbur's across the map.
That was only happening thanks to the PS5 bug. Using an Arc Thrower to kill Battle Titans regularly will take you upwards of 25 shots, if not 30 plus. Guard Dog now restores full ammo from supply boxes. Still horrendous, doesn't matter, that change did not change anything at all. Fire damage per tick increased by 50% from all sources. This is huge for the players and the freaking enemies. Hulks were one-tapping players beyond belief. It was bad. They still kind of do murk you if you get caught lacking a little bit. Liberator Penetrator now has full auto mode. There's some things that they put in the patch notes that I didn't even include because they're so minuscule. This is one of them I should have gotten rid of because it doesn't change anything. Dominator, increased damage by 100, massive. Increased stagger, massive. Slugger, reduced stagger. The thing that shoots slug shells in a game that's always preaching realism and we're trying to change these things because it makes more sense, doesn't stagger, but the Punisher does. Makes sense. Reduced damage by 30 and reduced demolition force. Why did this thing get nerfed? Because folks were using it. And the funny thing is, it's not even that great. And you just buff the Dominator to be 1,000 times better. At least to me. So these nerfs are just weird. Recoilless Rifle. Increased number of rockets you can restore. And same thing goes for the Spear. Heavy Machine Gun. Which at this time, there was an issue where the red dot was not aligned. And for folks that were preaching it was height over bore, you're smoked. It wasn't. The red dot was way above the center of the reticle. And there was no third person reticle at the time. And the solution wasn't to add third-person reticle. It was to instead reduce the RPMs, which takes away the whole fantasy of the machine gun, the heavy machine gun in the first place that folks wanted, which was to just be a guy blasting enemies with a machine gun. That's why folks play these. It's not because they're good. It's because they're fun to use. They fill that fantasy that they're looking for. Instead of giving it a third-person reticle or fixing the red dot, they reduce the freaking fire rate. Stratagems. Patriot exosuit rockets will now penetrate armor only on direct hit. This now makes it so the Patriot exosuit is essentially a worse anti-tank. Before, it was on par with recoilless rifle. The Eat It at the time takes 2 shots to kill bot titans. Patriot exosuit could do the same thing. And 1-shot armor on chargers. Now you're lucky to ever have that happen, if it can even happen. So this is all getting nerfed, by the way, on top of the Patriot exosuit rocket arm not aiming where your reticle is. It still aims to the far left unless you change your shoulder position, which I think only mouse and keyboard players can do. Such a strange thing to do. Enemies. Bouncing adjustments have been made to battle spears and nursing spears who do less damage with a puke. They still one-shot you, essentially. If you're getting spewed on and you dive to the left, you're dead. You're dead. You basically can't dive if they spew on you. Which is unfortunate. The battle titan can no longer be stunned. I don't mind this. Folks didn't like it. I do believe that EMS strike should stun battle titans to give it a use and a reason to be brought in the first place. But you could make it so stun grenades could stun titans, but EMS strike couldn't stun them unless they were stunned by a stun grenade into an EMS strike, and then they were stunned for the whole duration of the EMS strike. I found that out. Felt pretty good. I used it in my Titan testing video with all the support weapons and whatnot. Shriekers no longer create bug breaches. Freaking massive change. That was so tilting. You have 10 flying rats, and they have the freaking speed dial on the hombreros to go and murk you. It was so quick, too. Fun fact, hunters have one of the fastest breach calls in the game. It's less than a second or something ridiculous, whereas Wilbur, he has that dial up because he's a respectable gentleman. Wilbur the goat. Shriekers hitting you while they're dead now does significantly less damage. I like this initially. I think it's cool when you have wacky stuff just for a little bit. Because getting one-tapped by the bodies was hilarious. The reason why it didn't go over well is because players at this time were already annoyed with all the previous changes and the constant nerfs, which only get worse. You can pull shenanigans when you're not always gutting the player's power. When nothing has ever been overpowered outside of bugs. Helldiver balancing adjustments have been made to heavy and medium armor, protecting you better. You now take 10% less damage than before while wearing heavy and 5% less when wearing medium. Fortified commando and light armor is unchanged. This didn't really change a whole lot. We don't feel the big difference. And I think it finally put us to the point where maybe we're taking less headshot damage than we were after they made the very first change. But even still, you don't quite notice a difference given the intensity of the AI increasing, which I can't prove. But hey, man, you go back and play the game pre that 0.100 patch and you would feel the difference I felt. Fixes. Automaton enemy constellations that preferred to spawn more of certain Devastator types did not work and are now functioning as they should. AKA, you'll now see more of the Rocket Devastators and Shieldens rather than just regular Devastators that don't do a whole lot. This change is going to be really funny with the next update that we're about to see in a moment. We've improved the system that prevents Hellpod steering close to large or important objects. I forget when they made this change. I looked for it decently hard. I didn't go too crazy. But they made a change because folks were landing on high ground. Oh, not the high ground that you respawn on and don't have your weapons and you don't have anything to really do up there aside from shoot primary weapons. But they make it so you can't land on high ground, and this has some very horrible adverse effects that prevent players that want to play the game regularly and land on the ground, but want to pivot around large structures, that they can't do that. And I believe they also made changes to where you couldn't throw stratagems near surfaces. That one could be a bit made up. But I do notice that things bounce off like crazy, and maybe they always did that. I don't quite know. Warbond, Democratic detonation, happened on April 11th. We get Grenade Pistol, goated beyond belief. Thermites, lackluster to be generous. Eruptor, folks liked it, not a big fan. At the time, it was good. You had the shrapnel and folks enjoyed that. You could also use some shenanigans such as one-shotting charges apparently, and that was not going over well with the devs, understandably. Adjudicator was bad, is still bad. It's not negative. The guns, assault rifles are not good. They're not good. Explosive crossbow, a LARPer's dream that they end up gutting. Expert extraction. This thing isn't it's not useless, so I'll let it rock, even though I don't like the idea of it that much. Still not the worst. When did localization confusion happen? I hate that one with a passion. Then we get patch 0.203. Fixed an issue that resulted in different damage being dealt to enemies between PC and console players. I like how they couldn't just say what was actually happening. There was no effort to go into detail on what was happening. Instead, it's just this very vague thing, which I think I may have corrected. Well, I believe in Steam, it did not make much sense. But what was happening was the whole railgun thing. Oh, I didn't even mention it earlier. Son of a biscuit. Arc thrower. I'll go back and edit it. We'll do that. But this is the whole thing that let railgun two-shot Bile Titans, let arc thrower usually two-shot Bile Titans if the arcs landed correctly. And that was the issue that was making everything seem so good. It was letting arc thrower slap Bile Titans across the map, which led to me saying it's slapping Wilburs across the map when anything does remotely decent now. It was a bug. Ain't that something? There's a lot of bugs that I may forget, but many, many bugs have caused things to change in this game that should not have changed in the first place. And that may even go for burn damage, because for the longest time, you couldn't do burn damage if you're in a party and you weren't the host or being treated as the host. And when they fixed that, burn damage got nerfed a little bit. So that was actually a good nerf to have, even though it affected players for a long, long time. Bouncing. Armors with armor rating above 100 now also reduce damage on headshots. It does not seem that effective. The headshot reduction is not really worth folks wearing heavy armor if they didn't like it before. I like heavy armor, so I wear it regardless. But it's not very noticeable. And something that wasn't written down is they fixed it to where players were able to ping outside interests. You could ping a point of interest that's in Narnia, and you could see what it was on the mini-map, which did not require scout armor. Folks kept saying it did. No. Why do people love talking when they don't know the game? Drives me insane. You could do it in any armor. It was nice being able to ping stuff. I'd be okay if they removed it and then gave us a way to do it instead. Maybe give us one free reveal, something. I would pay samples for that. A one-time upgrade. You can see a POI. You can press a button, reveal one POI on the map. That'd be cool. But instead they removed it and didn't compensate anything. And they didn't say anything either. And that just causes players to freak out and talk about it. And you have the freaking peanut gallery saying, that never existed. It required scout armor. It did exist. It's just that things change and they don't document it. And then we look crazy and it caused this whole divide. It's ridiculous. Moving forward, Quasar Cannon charge time increased by 50%. There's no buff to recoilless rifle. There's no slight reduction to the cooldown for Eat It to try and match it and make that more fun to use. Nope. Just go ahead and nerf things that are being used the most. In this case, Quasar, which I don't even think was that good. It was good, but it got to the point where I got bored waiting even 10 seconds to shoot my shot. You wait 10 seconds plus a 3-second charge time to shoot it. That just gets boring. Whereas if you make my reload time for recoilless rifle faster, I would use that in a heartbeat, even though it's a backpack. I don't care. I like to use things and I don't like waiting if I can help it. And funny thing, there is this idea, this discovery, which maybe happened a long time ago, that recoilless rifle had a animation cancel. And the idea of an animation cancel making your reload faster, which is interactive, it's interactive to do in the first place, got me to use recoilless rifle. It wasn't a nerf to Quasar that did it. It was a buff, in a sense, to recoilless rifle that isn't even broken. Isn't that wild? Laser cannon. Damage increased a little bit overall, I suppose, but they reduced damage versus large volume bodies. I don't even really notice this much. And I'll say that laser cannon has always felt weird because you have two reticles. The thing that spins and the circle that you're supposed to aim with. And for some reason, the circle moves far left when you're shooting, as if there's this recoil. Laser cannon's in a weird spot. There's so many things you could change quality life-wise that would get players amped, It would just be slight improvements, not even increasing power necessarily, but just making things more fun to use. Buff sights. Let players see what they're... Imagine my glasses had freaking Helldivers 2 sights. There'd be two giant lines on my freaking glasses, giving me no vision out of the middle of the lenses. And that's a Helldivers 2 reticle. You can't see what you're aiming at. You have to freaking look underneath and on the sides of the reticle to see what you're shooting at. That's ridiculous. Then we have HMG. Third-person crosshair enabled. It took freaking close to a month, I think, to add that, but thank the Lord it's finally here. HMG is still horrible to play. 75 rounds. I don't care if it's a realistic thing because the ammo would look goofy if you had more. Realistically, no, it doesn't matter. At a certain point, the chase of realism is gutting any chance of enjoyability when using weapons. And HMG is a clear example of that. Some folks will play it regardless, and that's fine. And some folks will try and convince you it's good. That's not fine. Stop trying to spread that absolute brainworm that you have. Keep it contained. Get away from me. 75 rounds, egregious reload, and recoil is kind of crazy too. Like, all these things combined do not make a weapon fun to use. Guard Dog Rover, decreased damage by 30%. You barely notice it. It's not a big deal. Like, some folks may if they one-trick this thing, but I didn't quite notice it. I don't use it, though, anymore, and I was only using it a little bit at the time. When that nerf happened, I stopped using it, so maybe it did matter. Guard Dog, slight increase in damage. Nobody cares. The thing's terrible. This thing shoots 10, 15 rounds maybe, and then goes into hiding and reloads. And it doesn't have infinite ammo like the Guard Dog Rover. And it just doesn't do anything. Machine Gun Sentry. Increased health to match other sentries. Doesn't matter. Still gets one shot by so many things. Dies very quickly. One tap by rockets. Even with the ship module upgrade that makes your sentries take less explosive damage, doesn't do anything because the impact damage of the explosive rockets one tap everything sentry-wise, including Tesla Tower, which even has 33% more HP on top of other sentries. Regardless, they get one shot. They don't live very long. Sentries are not that useful. Even though I do enjoy autocannon sentry and I love Tesla Tower, there's just so much effort to try and make work. And there's improvements to be made here. Tesla Tower, give it a higher platform. That way, it stops hitting so many dead bodies when it arcs. Make it do less damage to players, so folks don't get one shot in Narnia. Exploding Crossbow. Slightly smaller explosion, increased stagger. Mind you, this is the update that they said had so many buffs. But so far, I've read a few nerfs. I've read a lot of nerfs, if we're being honest. Where's the railgun buff? I could have sworn that was in here. Maybe not. But Crossbow got gutted with all the changes they made. And this is also where they sort of reduced all of the mag capacity for whatever reason, because people had so much ammo and they weren't having to sit there and scavenge for loot as much. And we're the grunts, so we had to have no ammo. It just makes sense. Okay, fair enough. They buffed Plasma Punisher. That's good. Folks enjoy that. Still not as good as people make it out to be. Arc Blitzer, same deal. You have a faster fire rate. Still not fast enough unless we get dual wield. But people enjoy that. It still has horrible targeting. Arc Blitzer has horrible targeting, and the Arc Thrower had bad targeting that got made worse on top of all the nerfs. And they made it so the Hulks are stagger resistant, which made it so the Arc Thrower's stun buff didn't matter. Oh, Railgun. Increase armor pin in both safe mode and unsafe mode. Stagger force slightly reduced. So Railgun can't stagger Hulks either, which wasn't a big thing, because by the time you shoot again, they were going to shoot you. But you couldn't stagger Titans and stop their spit. But you got a bit more damage. Still not enough, because Railgun, it should be doing either the same thing the AMR does versus the bots, but just shoot differently, which is enough for gameplay enjoyability to give a different feel. But it doesn't. It's still horrible versus Factory Striders, tanks, any utility. And versus the bugs, I like it versus chargers. And with a Eat It, you can shoot one Eat It or anti-tank shot, Quasar or Recoilless, doesn't matter, about Titan's forehead, and shoot a railgun shot or two of these, and you'll kill it. That's cool. But versus the bots is still just a bad option. And I do believe before this, or with this patch, they made it so Bile Titans take reduced damage while spewing, which is another net nerf to players that I don't think was communicated that well. But it's definitely the case. And it's strange. It happened because the Titans were spewing and blowing themselves up, which still happens. So it seems that that change was meant to help something that didn't help. That's a very minor thing that only leads to people having a worse time. And then we have neat, insignificant, I'm not going to read all this nonsense. It's just very minor damage buffs to weapons, which also include the ammo reductions. But resupply increases, which is nice. And one of the funniest ones would be the diligence. Not the diligence counter sniper, but diligence. They increase the damage to 125. 125 is the damage you need to kill a devastator. But every time you shoot a gun, the moment it leaves the barrel, you have -1 damage. So it does 124 damage to a devastator head, and it won't one-shot them. And hunters have a lot of HP, so you can't one-shot them to the body either with diligence. So it's a really bad gun for those reasons. And the majority of primaries are still horrible because of how much HP the enemies have. Hunters have far more HP than any AR can handle in a relative fashion. Then we have enemies. Hulk Stagger Force resistance slightly increased, like I said earlier. Hulk Scorcher direct flamethrower damage reduced by 20%. It should still be a bit more because they still do so much damage to us. Hulk Scorcher still has a net buff. Devastator's fire rate slightly increased, only the standard Devastator. Okay. Gunship sideways movement increased. Yeah, this one did not go over well with some folks, even though they probably forgot it happened. You can kind of notice it. It's weird because you can't see where your shots are going, so it's hard to adjust. I wouldn't mind this, and I don't mind this that much, but it'd be better if maybe grenade pistol and grenade launcher, weapons that can kill gunships, would give you better tracing of the rounds you fire to see where they land on these guys. On the ground, you can figure it out. In the air, it's really difficult to practice that. Just a minor gripe. They also cap the spawn rate of gunships, so the spawn amount, which is nice. Scout Strider Riders now... Whoa, bars. Scout Strider Riders now are less vulnerable to explosives. Scorcher, grenades, grenade pistol, you name it. They take more to kill them on average, which was a nerf to the Scorcher. Wasn't that bad, though. Fog Generators, health and armor increased. I don't hate this because you were able to break a Scorcher or a Spewer of the fog from across the map in very few shots from a lot of stuff. What was it? It was maybe 5 shots from Scorcher? It was really easy. So that makes sense, but it's just more of a hassle now for a lot of players based on builds. And anti-tank becomes even more valuable. Shots that ricochet from heavy armored enemies will now properly hit the Helldiver who fired them, which I believe leads on to the Eruptor nerf and removing shrapnel, because folks were dying all of a sudden from shooting their own gun, because you're reflecting off of things because there's so much shrapnel being shot that you die. Enemy patrols. Unintendedly non-linear scaling of patrol spawns. The intention is that one player has 1/4 of the patrols compared to 4 players, but it used to be that they had 1/6. Patrol spawning has been increased when there are fewer than 4 players, which is bugged, and instead we now have the same patrol spawn timing regardless of group size, is how I understand it. And difficulty. No, group size. One of those. Patrol spawning is bugged. That's the main takeaway here. I forget exactly how. I don't know why. But patrol spawning is bugged. It's more intense than it should be for everyone involved except for 4-man. And that leads to people not having the greatest experience, including all of the other compounding changes, which is another major horrible theme in all of this. They make changes and make changes and make changes that all affect each other. And then eventually, players just go, yo, we're not having the greatest of times. And a lot of times, we get responses such as, just get good, which I wouldn't mind. But I think that get good is such a lame thing to say. I don't even say it half the time. I do my best to refrain from saying things of that nature because it doesn't solve anything. You're not helping anything. There is no learning happening. You're just trying to talk down to people. Patch 0.302 on May 7th. Balancing. Eruptor explosion damage increased by 40 and removed shrapnel. This was not good. It didn't matter a whole lot in the grand... I keep saying that. It didn't matter a whole lot when looking at the big picture because folks were already not enjoying the game given all the changes and how they're doing things and why they're doing it and how none of it just really makes any sense if you think about it for 2 seconds. But this made the people that were still playing very unhappy because they liked the Eruptor. And it was very hard to come by a war bond that had good stuff. And the fact that one war bond came out that had pretty good things, grenade pistol, We had Eruptor, which is kind of the only two things, but folks liked Adjudicator. Not sure how, but kudos to y'all. And they nerf Eruptor. Instead of trying to make it so you couldn't one-shot chargers, they just flat out remove explosions because people are one-shotting themselves. They didn't even mention the charger aspect. It's because players are one-shotting themselves, which is weird. And I think that one-shot to themselves was happening because of the recent reflection change. I wrote that down. They didn't write that. I wrote that. Moving on. Enemies. Increased Shrieker sight and hearing range slightly. Increased gunship hearing range slightly. Like, those are not a big deal, but it's just funny. We fixed an issue with the way damage over time effects were being applied. This is probably one of the single best things they have done, was fixing a bug. Because now folks could use Incendiary Breaker, Flamethrower, Napalm Strike, which are really good items, and actually do damage they're supposed to be doing. The Daunt would finally work. Fixed issue with some weapon scopes not being aligned in first-person view. This was one of the best patches, and it's based on just 2 things. That's hilarious. This made it so the AMR, which has been misaligned forever, finally felt better. It's still scuffed a little bit, but I can live with it. And HMG. Earlier I said that the red dot was way above where it should be. Now it was more or less in the center of your screen. They're still slightly scuffed apparently. I can't notice it, so I'm cool with it for now. But that's huge. You made 2 weapons better. AMR is amazing to use versus the bots. HMG is still horrible, but we move on. The sound when stimming no longer plays while being interrupted. That is cap beyond belief. I freaking I get slapped up. Like I'm in a freaking slapbox competition. I'm getting slapped up by all kinds of bugs. I'm getting bullet flinched by the bots. Helldivers can no longer land on tall rocks in the Horde defend mission. Like, why? Such a weird thing to waste time worrying about. Helldivers can no longer land on top of bug pillars and deactivate terminated control system missions. Wasn't that mission only here for a few days? Anytime a player finds something creative to do, it will almost certainly get nerfed, even when it's not that big a deal.
But creativity also exists in action games. And it's the creativity of coming up with solutions at a moment's notice.
That was Piles, who is the current chief creative officer, was the CEO of Arrowhead, and is a freaking gamer. Much respect. They have great ideas to make the game more fun. Sometimes realism takes a bit more of a precedence than it should, but overall, good stuff. And they gave a really fantastic presentation for 40 minutes at the Nordic Games, and this was one part of it stood out the most. Focus on the core. Create a hobby that lets you be creative. And he mentioned, essentially, creativity in action games is about finding unique solutions to problems at a moment's notice. Paraphrasing here. And that's exactly what has made me play Helldivers 2 for so long. It's what keeps me playing the game to this day, is finding new ways to handle things that were once a big problem. You figure out the weakness, you learn it, and you get good at it, and then you get good at it. You get good at facing it in these crazy situations, and that's the fun stuff. And doing it with different weapons is enjoyable. Even if it's the same thing, there's differences that might be slight. And there's math involved, kind of. I have a Factory Strider. I can shoot underneath it and blow it up, which folks didn't know that at first. Learn the weakness. It's big stuff. And if I have my Quasar Cannon, I can shoot one shot, then I have to wait 18 seconds now to shoot another one. Or I can shoot one Quasar shot underneath, swap to grenade pistol, shoot that, swap to Dominator, shoot that 3 times, and back to grenade pistol, and chances are I'll kill it. So it's think about all the ways you can handle something, which there's tons of different ways, and then adding all those up together to try and get a quick kill on something and then move on. Because you can't just sit there facing something for 20 seconds at a time every time. And that's the fun stuff, is finding these solutions and figuring out how to react accordingly based on the knowledge you have. And there's so much to learn in Helldivers, but the problem is that creativity is being stunted because players find solutions and those solutions get removed. Not all the time, but often enough. And there's no new solutions being provided that are also fun and engaging. For the bugs, most weapons are not good against them. Can you use them? Yes. Can you beat missions? Yes. They're still not good. It doesn't matter. You can beat bug missions and use nothing. So who cares? But folks want to feel some kind of power, not overpowered, at least not me. I just want things to be useful. And the bots, the automatons, have very meaningful weak spots on the majority of things, making the majority of support weapons somewhat viable. You can kill a tank using a freaking a machine gun, even though it's not very quick, but you can. You can kill a tank using a freaking Dominator. You can kill a Factory Strider using a Dominator, and it's honestly not bad. Don't nerf Dominator. But versus the bugs, it's not the same thing. Killing a Charger is a nightmare with the majority of weapons. Unless you hit the wagon, but even then, it's not the greatest. And Bile Titans, don't even get me started. And then also for the bugs, look at all the increased amounts you have to face. Mostly it's going to be like the medium, and small units. But that's where things are kind of weird. And the fact that we're nerfing things, even though the nerfs might be small, it still doesn't give folks any excitement for the new updates to log in, which has been the theme this whole video. I've shown you the graphs, maybe, hope, with the editing and whatnot. And at almost no point was there a new update that had a spike in players. That's not normal. It's just not. This game had got a lot of content that was good. And that's why I don't get folks saying it's normal for games to lose their player base. Yeah, when nothing changes, when no updates are given. But in this case, we were given updates, but nothing really changed. If anything, things got worse or bug fixes happened. But folks, when they hear a bug fix, they don't usually jump for joy. It depends. And that's why things just feel kind of weird. And war bonds haven't been better either. I think I didn't talk about the Frost War Bond, maybe for the best because I don't have anything good to say about it. We got Poor Patriots War Bond on May 9th. Incendiary Impact Grenade, which is nice. Doesn't last a whole heck of a long time, but still, it's a decent grenade. I'm going to one-trick stuns because they're ridiculous. We get Pummeler, which people like, but isn't that good. Folks like it, and I think it's good because of all the other comparisons that are terrible, and that's where we're at as well. We think that people will think that things are amazing just because the competition is horrid. And that's exactly what happened to Pummeler. But in reality, it's not that great. No medium pen is at this point a detriment. We almost need to have an upgrade system, which would take time to add, but weapons need to have medium pen, otherwise they're basically useless. Exceptions are things that do fire damage like Ensign Breaker. That's a good gun because of how well it does versus the chaff. I wouldn't even say it's overpowered, it's just good against small units. And it's okay against medium, and that feels good. It's not being completely useless, which is we'll get to that in a moment. Pummeler, Verdict Pistol, Light Armor Pin, same deal, I'm not going to use it. Motivational Shocks, this is basically useless. If you go ahead and use this for anything, and folks tell you how it's supposed to work, you will almost not notice a difference. You have to sit there and time things to feel like there's any improvement. That ain't particularly good. But then again, maybe that's the same thing for a lot of stuff, a lot of boosters. There's small bonuses. But why does this exist when we have muscle? What's it called? The booster for Musclehead, I believe, something like that. But it's a similar thing. It's to help you with not getting slowed as much, but based on different parameters. Why not combine these? Tenderizer, one of the single worst assault rifles in the entire game. That damage is too low. Assault rifles don't do meaningful damage, and or the small enemies have too much HP. Purifier. Apparently, this doesn't actually have medium pen, and the charge time is gross. A second charge time for a gun, especially a primary, isn't going to feel good unless it hits like an absolute truck. And even if this didn't have the medium pen bug, which I assume is not working, it wouldn't hit that hard. I don't believe so. And armor with reused passives. Unfortunate. And then after that, we get the XO49 Emancipator on May 26th, which isn't that good either. It does far less durable damage than the autocannon and autocannon sentry to the tune of 1/5 or 1/6 less, which is bad, making it pretty much not that great versus medium, versus heavy or elites, unless you get behind a tank, but versus the bots, you're gonna get blown up because mechs have a light armor for their legs and a bit of their midsection. And your legs are pretty big on mech, so even the smallest of units can hit you and blow you up eventually. You don't feel very tanky in a mech, you don't feel very powerful in a mech, but folks kind of like it a little bit. I just think it's a bit of cope, and the moment that the free mech goes away, folks won't really use this. Long Yap didn't track, and Helldivers 2, realism is an excuse. The grunt focus it's gone way crazy, and there's no real intention to make weapons that aren't being used more fun, and instead they just nerf the things that are popular. And there's too many things that change based on bugs. Even when it's pretty obvious it's a bug to the people that play the game a lot, but there's no conversation around that. And so things get nerfed, and they don't get, I wouldn't even say buffed, they don't get brought back to where they were, which was fine for months. And it just leads to less enjoyable interactions in the game as a whole. So for the whole realism thing, that is a flat out scapegoat. They change stuff based on realism, and it is almost always at the detriment of the player and almost never to improve things and add quality of life based on real life. Even though we're playing a sci-fi game, we're facing giant bugs, robots, we can die 20 plus times. Who cares about realism at that point? You can make things realistic to a degree while still maintaining the enjoyability. For instance, make guns that look realistic, but then give them the qualities they need to be fun to use. I don't care if a gun only has 10 shots in real life. Give it like 60 if that's required to make it fun to use. Otherwise, all it is a nice museum piece that no one's ever going to take out of the case to shoot in the game. The whole grunt thing. I think that the grunt stuff was cool before 0.100, and I think that first update happened because players were doing too well based on stats. Who cares? Your missions are not difficult. The missions themselves require no teamwork. They legit, you require more teamwork to open a bunker than you do to complete any mission in the game, which is why folks can solo your missions with ease on the highest difficulty. And nothing will really change that unless you make the missions require more effort. And you can still have it be soloable, but it takes more effort. For instance, off the dome skis, kind of. Have a mission, you go underground for part of it, top ground for most of it, or for some of it, but underground you have these two cases that can be transported by two people on both sides holding one handle, and that goes relatively quick. One person can push it, and that goes kind of slow. And so the idea is you have two people in two different tunnels pushing this, moving this objective, and if you die, I'm not sure how you can maybe handle that. There's a drill that comes down, some freaking Deep Rock Galactic. I don't know. But that alone already offers more team play because you have an objective that encourages folks to handle it at the same time. Whereas every other objective in the game so far can be done by one person. And if you have two folks doing it, it's maybe 10 seconds faster because there's still steps to it. Doing the oil, the 710 refine mission, you can't do the next steps unless you do the first one. And the only exception is when you have the three pipelines to turn. That's the only time where having a group is faster, and it's by a few seconds. So missions don't really require teamwork. Weapons don't require teamwork, and the team loading is a hassle. Having to take off my backpack and give it to someone so they can reload me, who wants to do that randoms? The game is played by mostly randoms playing with randoms. And no one wants to go into a mission wearing their loadout and then have to drop what they're doing to help you out. Like, they will, but no one's jonesing for that. And all the while, they're not playing the game. They press a button, they AFK, and the game loads for you. So even then, you're doing nothing. But that's the only change that happens in a group. So all the freaking people that say it's co-op, it's 4-player, doesn't feel like it. Yeah, you can play 4-player, but why is playing solo so much more engaging for me? Because it's actually challenging. And even then, I'd say it's challenging, but it could be more challenging. And I wish that group play was crazier. I love playing with people. I actually don't like playing solo all the time. It depends. Like, for content, it's kind of fun playing solo because you never know who you run into. Some people say some wild stuff. But when it comes to challenging stuff, I love playing in groups. Raiding in WildStar, trios in Apex, freaking 6-man in Overwatch 1, 5-man Overwatch 2. It fell off pretty heavy. It's fun playing as a group because then you have more responsibility. But the game is so easy right now in a group that it's just, I can AFK and still win missions and do well. After watching all of that, you can call me a lot of things, but you can't say I don't care. If you've been watching my content, you recognize that what I've been saying is pretty consistent. I covered the very first update, 0.100. I talked about the PS5 bug extensively. And all the while, folks are telling me I'm a bad player. I have no idea what I'm talking about. Meanwhile, what's happening now? The PS5 and Sony thing. You're just you're a grifter. You're trying to talk about it for clicks. Meanwhile, talking about it is what got things to change, even though there's still 100 and something countries that can't buy the game. But that's more of a Sony thing, and they're smoked beyond belief. I just want the game to be as good as I know it can. Not because I have this crazy dream, but because it's the game I've already played. I know it can be far better. There's so much more improvement it could have, even past what I've played in the past, what we've played in the past, and we enjoyed. But the vision, the idea, the philosophy around balancing has got to change. And I don't know if one person can change that, but if anyone can, it would be Piles. He mentioned time to kill, or TDK, being a big factor in why folks don't use certain weapons, I believe, or something like that. Whatever he said, it made a lot of sense, and it was genius, because that is the quickest way to describe why folks don't use certain weapons. Time to kill. That's the biggest reason. But folks will still use bad weapons because they like the appeal, they like the aesthetic and the fantasy. But if you make things better, then you'll attract more people to use different stuff, add variety, and you add more playtime that's meaningful. That's what I'm looking for. I want things to be good. I'm not looking for everything to be the same, per se. Although, to some degree, I wouldn't mind it. Let's say AMR, Railgun. I wouldn't care if they both did the exact same thing to bots, but maybe Railgun requires one less shot because it requires charging. They're both snipers in a sense. And that would make it more fun, because right now I just don't use Railgun versus the bots. It's not that great. Horrible versus gunships, Factory Striders, tanks, utility. AMR is decent versus those things, so why would I ever use the Railgun? At a certain point, you can have things do similar stuff, but the way that they play is different enough, it still provides that meaningful variety. Look at Dauntless, look at Monster Hunter, look at a lot of these games. Your weapons do the same thing. They kill the monsters. They're all meant to kill the monsters, but how they do it is different enough that it still provides a freaking fantastic experience regardless of which weapon you use. And if you really want to, if you really are a fan of the game, you can play every single weapon and have a good time. Right now, we cannot play every single weapon and have a good time because we're basically useless in so many different situations. I am of the firm belief that this idea that we should have all these niche aspects doesn't make much sense at the moment. If we get harder content, I could see trying to specialize into certain roles to try and make the mission possible. But no mission requires that kind of difficulty. Not even close. The last thing I want to say is a game for everyone is a game for no one. A game for no one is a game that's no fun. I think that Helldivers 2 should focus more on fun. They can keep the difficulty, they can also increase it, but fun should be a major factor. When you add changes, are those changes going to improve the player experience or take away from it? Anyway, thanks for watching. Have a good day.